Hey everyone, thanks for being here. I swear if that smug bastard had said one more word, I would have cracked his jaw in a way he'd never smile again. We were at a dinner I didn't even want. I had no idea it was a setup, an ambush with candles and wine. But there he was, Blake Harrington, my wife's so-called colleague. He was already seated when I arrived, wearing that tight black shirt like he was auditioning for a protein powder ad, smirking like he owned the damn place. And Emily, my wife, sitting next to him with her hand far too close to his thigh, laughing too loud at his dumb jokes. She had asked me to meet her for a serious talk over dinner. I thought maybe she was finally ready to work on our marriage. I was wrong. Liam, she said sweetly, motioning to the seat across from them, this is Blake. You've heard me mention him from work. Yeah, I'd heard, too often. The mentor, the inspiration, the guy who just gets her. I should have known. I sat, forcing a smile, but my fists were already clenched under the table. Then Blake leaned in, eyes locked on mine like we were in some sick Western standoff. I'll make this simple, he said, his voice smooth, calculated. You've got two options, Liam. Leave quietly, or face me like a man. Emily didn't flinch, she smiled. My ears started ringing. The room fell silent except for the blood pounding in my head. I repeated the words in my mind. Leave quietly or face me like a man. He thought I'd crawl, that I'd just nod, walk out, and leave my whole life behind while he played house with my wife. I took a breath, smiled, looked him right in his dead eyes, and said, you want your teeth whole or in pieces? Then I stood up and cleared the table with his face. Plates shattered, wine splashed across Emily's white dress like blood from a fresh wound. People screamed. Blake tried to stand, but I slammed him back with one punch, years of frustration, betrayal, and cold nights all behind it. Emily shrieked, pulling at my arm. Liam, stop, you're embarrassing me. Embarrassing her, after she had paraded me into a restaurant to get dumped in front of her new toy like a disposable napkin. Security rushed in. I was dragged out with blood on my shirt and glass in my knuckles. Blake was still on the ground, wheezing, his alpha energy leaking onto the marble floor. Outside, I stood in the cold, staring at the door as it closed behind them. I didn't feel rage anymore, just silence, and one sickening truth. She brought me here to watch me lose. That wasn't the start of the affair. That was the final act. She had played it all the way to curtain call, and I had walked in like a clueless actor reading lines for the first time. Emily used to be the kind of woman who looked at me like I hung the stars. Now she laughed at my pain over lobster bisque. But that night didn't break me. It woke me up, because I knew one thing. This wasn't over. When I got home that night, the house felt unfamiliar, like someone had rearranged the energy. Not the furniture, not the decor, just something off. Her perfume lingered in the hallway, but it wasn't just hers. There was a second scent, something musky, arrogant. I walked straight into our bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, tight corners like a hotel room. Emily never made the bed like that. I sat down, palms still red from punching Blake, mind buzzing like a hornet's nest. That scene played over and over in my head, his smug voice, her passive silence, and the twisted look of satisfaction on her face when I was pulled away. My phone buzzed. A message from her. You didn't have to do that. You embarrassed yourself. No, are you okay? No, let's talk. Just a cold line of blame. That's when the switch flipped. I stood up and began looking. Not because I was suspicious anymore, I knew, but because I needed the truth in my hands, something tangible. I started in the closet. Nothing unusual until I checked the shoe rack. A pair of heels I'd never seen, red, expensive. Emily hadn't worn heels in months around me. Next stop, her vanity. I scrolled through her tablet. She never locked it. She thought I trusted her too much for that. She was wrong. The first photo I saw made my chest cave in. It was her, barely dressed, taking mirror selfies in a hotel room I didn't recognize, date stamped last weekend. She told me she was at her friend Nicole's baby shower in San Diego. Another swipe. There was Blake in the background, shirtless, brushing his teeth. My breathing turned shallow. My eyes burned. There were videos, messages, some of them voice notes. His deep tone calling her my little secret. Her giggling like a schoolgirl. She called him daddy in one. I almost threw the tablet through the wall. They mocked me. She even told him once, he still thinks we're going through a rough patch. Poor baby. That line cut deeper than any punch I'd thrown earlier. Suddenly, everything added up. The late work meetings, the girls' nights, the sudden interest in dressing up when she barely wore makeup for me anymore. The coldness, the eye rolls, The sigh when I tried to initiate intimacy. She had checked out months ago. She wasn't mine. I was just a placeholder. A ghost in the house she pretended to live in. The next morning, she walked in like nothing happened. Hair tied up, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone like I didn't exist. I was sitting at the dining table, eyes locked on her. She looked up. What? I didn't answer. I just slid the tablet across the table to her, open on the messages. Her fingers froze mid-scroll. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly looked up at me. Why were you snooping through my stuff? That's what she said. Not I'm sorry, not even denial, just deflection. I leaned forward. You lied to me. You gaslit me for months. You humiliated me in public. You brought him into our lives and treated me like trash while you got off behind my back. And now you're mad I found out? She shrugged. You've been boring for a long time, Liam. You stopped trying. I needed someone who made me feel something. I felt my jaw tighten. And this is what you chose? A cocky douchebag who can barely form a sentence without flexing his biceps. She smirked. At least he listens. At least he doesn't make me feel like I'm wasting my best years waiting for someone to change. That was the moment I realized, she had never loved me the way I loved her. She'd loved the idea of me, the man who paid the bills, who built the life. But once the routine set in, once I got comfortable, she got restless. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, started pulling out clothes from the drawers, stuffing them into a duffel bag. She followed. You're just going to leave? That's it? I zipped the bag. You already left. You just didn't tell me. As I passed her in the hallway, she said something under her breath. I stopped. What? She looked me in the eye. Cold, shameless. You were never man enough for me. I didn't speak. I didn't react. I just walked out that door, bag over my shoulder, leaving the woman I once adored in a house filled with lies. But deep inside, I knew I wasn't done. Not yet. I moved into a short-term rental that night. 4 walls, no memories, no scent of betrayal, just silence. And that silence was deafening. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, that smirk when Blake opened his mouth at the restaurant, the way she looked at me like I was a fly buzzing around her champagne glass. I kept replaying the messages. Her voice in those recordings wasn't the Emily I married. That woman used to talk about building a future, about adopting a dog, about kids, for God's sake. This Emily whispered things into Blake's ear that made my skin crawl. She laughed at my texts, mocked my habits, said I was too soft, too predictable. She told him I was the kind of man who would die paying someone else's mortgage. And he responded, good. We'll let him. I wasn't just betrayed, I was dehumanized. For 3 days, I didn't respond to her calls or texts. She didn't apologize, not once. Only messages like, you overreacted. We can be adults about this. And let's talk terms. She wanted to negotiate our separation like a business deal. No shame, no regret, just logistics. On the 4th day, she showed up at my door. I opened it, and there she stood, in that fake innocent outfit. Sweater, jeans, no makeup, like she was still the girl I once proposed to on that beach in Monterey. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside. She walked in, sat down, crossed her legs, cool as ice. You've had your tantrum, now we need to figure out what's next. I leaned against the counter. You're acting like you didn't destroy everything we had. She sighed. It wasn't working. You were distant. You didn't see me anymore. I laughed bitterly. I saw you every day. I tried, but you checked out, and instead of speaking up, you found some gym bro with the IQ of a houseplant and gave him what you swore only belonged to me. Don't be dramatic, she said, eyes rolling. It wasn't like I planned it. No? Then explain the hotel bookings. The lingerie I never saw. The videos on your phone. Explain why he felt confident enough to tell me to leave my own marriage quietly. Her lips twitched. You're acting like I committed a crime. No, I said, stepping closer. You committed an assassination. You killed the man I was, and you didn't even bury him with dignity. She stood up then, suddenly angry. I needed more. You didn't give it. You were just existing, Liam. Coming home, watching TV, being the same safe, boring guy the first married. So instead of fixing it, you found someone to screw behind my back and made me think it was my fault? She walked toward the door. You always had to be the victim. Maybe if you'd been more of a man, you'd still have a wife. I stopped her right there. No, I don't still have a wife. I never had one. I had a parasite, one that smiled while it drained me. She turned back, expression dark. You think you're the only one who suffered? I wasted years of my life pretending I was happy, Liam. You didn't pretend, I said. You lied. And then she said it, casually, like she was talking about buying eggs. I've been with Blake for 6 months. And you know what? I feel alive again. There it was. The truth. 6 months. Every kiss. Every night I asked her what was wrong. Every time she pulled away from me in bed. It all made sense. While I was planning our anniversary, she was planning hotel getaways with him. While I worked overtime, she was moaning someone else's name, in my car, in my bed, in my life. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded. Good, I said. Then you don't need to hear what I did yesterday. Her eyes narrowed. What? I pulled a folder from the drawer, dropped it on the table. Inside, bank statements, screenshots, copies of joint account transfers, her secret credit card, hotel receipts, a copy of the conversation she had with Blake about hiding assets. I'd hired someone, a friend who owed me a favor, an ex-cop who didn't ask questions. Emily's face went pale. Liam, what is this? I looked her dead in the eye. Evidence. I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking everything. And I'll make sure your alpha male knows exactly what happens when you challenge a quiet man and forget what he's capable of when you back him into a corner. She reached for the folder. I snatched it back. We're done. Leave. Her lips trembled. For the first time, just a flicker of fear. But it was too late for tears. Too late for regret. I'd found the truth. And the man I used to be, the one who trusted blindly, who waited for love to return, he died at that restaurant table. What stood in his place was someone new. And I wasn't done yet. 3 days after I handed her that folder, Blake showed up at my job, all faux move, real alpha energy. He waited outside the parking garage like some action movie villain, leaning against his black Dodge Charger with mirrored sunglasses and that same cocky smirk he had at the restaurant. I knew he wanted to play this out like a man-to-man chat. Maybe even offer some backhanded apology. But when I saw him, my blood hit a boil I hadn't felt since high school fights behind the bleachers. Liam, he called out, casual, like we were old buddies catching up. I didn't respond, just kept walking. You got a second? He asked, stepping into my path. I stopped, looked him over. He wasn't worth it, but I couldn't ignore him, not after the damage he'd done. What do you want, Blake? He gave a slow, self-assured shrug. Look, man, I didn't mean for things to blow up like that. I figured she'd break it off with you clean. Didn't know she'd drag you into that whole dinner scene. You figured, I repeated. You figured you could slide into my wife's life, into her body, and I'd just disappear quietly? He raised his hands. I get it, you're pissed, but let's not pretend she didn't make the decision too. I stepped in closer. She did, and so did you. So whatever fantasy you had about taking over my place, forget it. You're not the alpha. You're just a side piece that got too confident. His smile cracked for a second. You should know, she's thinking about moving in with me. Good, I said. She'll fit in right next to your ego and your protein powders. His face twitched. You don't scare me, Liam. Then you're even dumber than you look, I said quietly, leaning in. Because I should. He clenched his jaw. This doesn't have to get messy. You crossed that line 6 months ago, I said. When you started talking about options. And then I said it again, calm, but deadly. Do you want your teeth whole or in pieces? He flinched. Just a little. Enough for me to see that under all the gym muscle and loud talk, there was fear. He wasn't built for chaos. He was built for mirrors and followers. I turned my back and walked away, knowing that the real damage I would do wouldn't be with fists anymore. Back at the rental, I opened my laptop and started going through everything again. The documents, the timeline, the evidence. My lawyer had already begun drawing up the papers. And the more we found, the more this whole charade crumbled. Emily had dipped into joint accounts to fund weekend getaways. Bought Blake a watch on my dime. Even tried to move money under her sister's name. She was sloppy, greedy, but what stunned me most was how easily she had flipped the switch. How she could lie so smoothly, smile through betrayal, act like she was the victim. Every message I uncovered, every receipt I printed, was another nail in the coffin of the woman I thought I knew. Later that night, I got a call from her. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. Liam, she said, her voice quieter now, less venom. What? I just wanted to say. I didn't expect you to react like this. Like what? Like a man who got used? Who got stabbed in the back and dragged through your mess? I didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, you did. You just didn't think I'd fight back. There was silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. He's not like I thought, she finally said. I said nothing. I thought he'd be stronger. More. Protective. Translation. You thought he'd save you from the consequences. Another long silence. I made a mistake. I closed my eyes and shook my head slowly, even though she couldn't see it. No, Emily, a mistake is forgetting our anniversary. A mistake is saying something cruel in the heat of a fight. You didn't make a mistake. You built this, lie by lie, week by week, bed by bed. You just didn't think I'd burn it down faster than you could stack it. She tried to speak, but I hung up. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't want her pity. I had spent too long letting her twist me into something I wasn't. She made me doubt myself. She made me question my worth. But standing there, holding the proof of her betrayal and the ashes of our marriage, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, my peace, my dignity. She could keep her muscles for Brain's boyfriend. I had something better: freedom, and I was going to use it. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Probably because Emily didn't want too much of our dirty laundry aired in court. She thought she could intimidate me into a quiet settlement, paint herself as the wounded wife who simply fell out of love. But the minute my lawyer dropped the financial evidence and digital files on the table, her tune changed fast. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She negotiated like a businesswoman trying to salvage her image. We had one final meeting in person, mediated, formal, quiet. She wore a navy suit and no makeup this time, trying to look put together, professional, like the kind of woman who couldn't possibly be caught naked in a hotel room on company retreats. I barely looked at her. At one point, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Why are you doing this? You're humiliating both of us." I kept my voice even. "You're not embarrassed about what you did. You're embarrassed that people found out." She sat back, eyes narrowing, and didn't speak to me again for the rest of the session. When it was over, I walked out with my dignity intact and a clean slate. She walked out with half her reputation shattered, and her gym boy toy waiting outside in the car, texting her like a lost puppy. I thought I'd feel satisfied. I didn't. There's no victory lap in betrayal. No gold medal for surviving someone else's lies. There's just numbness. And after that, a long, slow rebuild. Nights were the hardest. It wasn't the loneliness. It was the echoes. The silence that used to be filled with her laughter, even if it was fake near the end. The way the sheets didn't smell like her anymore. How I caught myself reaching for my phone to text her something stupid, then remembered she was probably busy doing God knows what with a guy who thought push-ups were a personality trait. I started going to the gym, not because I wanted to be like him, but because I needed to sweat it out. The poison, the anger, the grief, it had to go somewhere. Funny thing, the more I pushed through reps, the more I remembered who I used to be before her. Not bitter, not broken, just me. One night, a friend invited me out to a bar. Said I needed to get back out there. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed the air. That's where I ran into her. Not Emily, her sister, Rachel. She walked in with a few friends, froze when she saw me at the bar. After a beat, she came over. "Liam, God, I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I said. She glanced down at her drink, then looked up at me. "I heard everything. I'm sorry." I nodded. "Don't be. You didn't cheat on me." She gave a sad smile. I tried to talk her out of it, you know. When I found out, she told me to mind my own business. That didn't surprise me. Rachel tilted her head. "You doing okay?" I shrugged. "Some days better than others." She leaned on the bar, watching me. "You know, Emily was always the one who needed attention. Always had to win, even if it meant breaking something beautiful." I looked at her. Did she ever love anyone? For real? Rachel didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Only herself." And somehow, hearing that helped. Later that night, I walked home under a quiet sky, the kind of night where the air feels clean, like something toxic finally left your bloodstream. And for the first time in months, I smiled without force. Not because I'd won, not because I had revenge, but because I finally knew what peace felt like. And no one, not Emily, not Blake, not even the ghost of who I used to be, could take that away. About a week after that night at the bar, I got a message that caught me off guard. It was from Blake. It started with, "I need to talk. Man to man." I almost laughed when I saw it. The same guy who once puffed out his chest and told me to leave quietly now wanted to talk like we were equals. My first instinct was to block him. But curiosity, it's a hell of a thing. I agreed to meet him. Public place, neutral ground. I picked a quiet coffee shop near the edge of town. He showed up late, slower than usual, less polished. His hair was messy. His eyes had bags under them. The smugness was gone. He sat down across from me and didn't say a word for a full 30 seconds. Then, finally, I think I made a mistake. I didn't respond. She's not what I thought, he went on. I mean, she's beautiful, yeah. But she's, dot. He paused, searching for the word. Poison. I leaned back in my chair. Welcome to the club. She used to talk about you, he continued, like he needed to confess. Told me you didn't care about her. That you ignored her. That you hadn't touched her in months. I nodded slowly. And you believed her. He looked away. I wanted to. There it was. The truth. He wanted to believe I was the villain so he could feel better about taking what wasn't his. He thought he was rescuing her from a loveless marriage. Turns out, he was just the next chapter in a book she writes over and over again. She's already seeing someone else, he said, eyes low. That made me blink. Wait, she's cheating on you? He nodded, the shame on his face so thick, I almost pitied him. She met him at her yoga class. Some guy with a boat. She denies it, of course. Says I'm paranoid, but the signs. I know them now. The late nights, the new lingerie, the sudden, girls, weekends. He looked up at me. It's like déjà vu, but this time, I'm you. I wanted to feel triumph. I wanted to smirk and say I told you so. But all I felt was exhaustion. You played your part in it, Blake, I said quietly. Now you get to see what it's like on the other side. He rubbed his face. I don't think she's capable of real love. She's not, I said. She's only capable of attention. And when it runs out, she moves on. He didn't reply, just sat there, drowning in the mess he helped create. I stood up. Good luck, man. I mean that. He looked up, confused. You're not mad anymore? I was, I said. But anger's heavy, and I've carried enough already. As I walked out of the cafe, the sun hit my face, warm, clean. I felt lighter than I had in months. I spent that evening doing something I hadn't done in years, sitting on my porch, barefoot, with a glass of bourbon and silence for company. No phone buzzing, no lies, no masks, just me. It's strange how betrayal can feel like death when it first hits. But in the aftermath, you start to realize, it was the beginning of something else. A shedding of skin, a brutal rebirth. Emily had called once since the papers were finalized. Left a voicemail I never listened to. I deleted it the second I saw her name. She didn't get closure. She didn't get the last word. That was mine now. I started traveling again. Weekend trips, hikes, old hobbies I let fade while trying to keep a marriage alive that was already rotting from the inside. I even reconnected with my brother. We hadn't spoken in over a year because Emily said he drained my energy. Turns out, she just hated that he saw through her. Rachel texted me occasionally, nothing heavy, just check-ins, a shared joke. I appreciated that. She never tried to dig for details or force healing. She just let me exist. One night, she sent me a photo of an old Christmas from years ago, me, Emily, and the whole family. I looked at myself in that photo for a long time. The smile on my face. The way I held her hand. I wasn't faking it, she was. That was the difference. I've learned to stop mourning what never really existed. The love I thought I had. The marriage I thought we shared. It was my truth, not hers. And that's okay. Because I've got something now she'll never have. Peace. Accountability. A soul that didn't rot when the lies came crashing down. She's probably still out there, chasing that feeling, that high, that next man to worship her until he sees what's behind the smile. But me? I'm building again, brick by brick, and this time, it's real. A few months passed, seasons change, I didn't count days anymore, just small victories. Waking up without a pit in my stomach. Eating without that metallic taste of anxiety. Sleeping through the night without nightmares of her voice whispering lies in my ear. Then one morning, I opened my email and saw her name again. Emily, subject line. Please just hear me out. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes before clicking. Liam, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I wouldn't be writing if it wasn't important. I messed up, I see that now. Blake is gone. He left after I found out he'd been cheating. And now I'm just, alone. I've had time to think about everything. Us. What I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to understand that I was lost. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to feel something, anything. And I realize now, the only time I ever felt truly seen was when I was with you. You were always there. Maybe I didn't appreciate it then. Maybe I was too blind to see how rare that was. Can we talk? Just once? Please. I read it once. Then again. Then deleted it without replying. Because here's the thing. She didn't want me. She wanted the version of me who hadn't learned to live without her yet. The man who used to bend, shrink, and compromise to keep her happy. But that man died when she chose to humiliate me in public and dared to treat me like a burden she couldn't wait to shake off. What she really missed was the safety, the loyalty, the comfort of knowing someone would clean up the emotional mess she made. She didn't miss me, she missed being adored, that's the difference. And by then, I was already seeing someone new. Her name was Claire. I met her by accident at a bookstore. I dropped a copy of The Stranger by Camus. She picked it up, looked at the title, and said, "Heavy read for someone with kind eyes." We talked for an hour that day. Then coffee, then walks, then nothing for a few weeks, because I didn't want to rush into anything. I had scars. I told her that. She said, "Good, scars mean you're healing." She didn't rush me, didn't interrogate, she just showed up, steady, honest, warm. With Claire, everything felt easy. No pretending, no need to prove I was enough. She didn't ask about Emily much, only once, when she saw the way I stiffened after my phone buzzed and I saw that name again. "You don't owe me the story," she said. "But if you ever want to tell it, I'll listen." And I did. Eventually, on a quiet Sunday, with rain tapping the windows and her hand in mine, I told her everything. Not because I wanted sympathy, but because it felt good to release it all into the air and let it drift away. Claire didn't say much, just listened, and when I was done, she looked at me and said, "That was never about you." That was her broken reflection trying to find a mirror. That line stuck with me. One night, I found myself driving past the old house, ours, back when it still felt like something sacred. It looked smaller now, dull, lifeless. The lawn was overgrown, the shutters crooked, like it had given up trying to look pretty. I didn't stop, just drove by, and I smiled, not out of spite, not because I'd won, but because I survived. Emily once told me I was too soft, that I wasn't built to face chaos, that I'd crumble without her. But here I was, standing tall, scarred, but unshaken. The storm came, and it passed, and all it did was clear the view. Now, I see the world better. I trust sharper, I walk stronger, I laugh deeper. There's a strange peace in losing everything. It makes you appreciate what's real. Like mornings that start with coffee and no secrets. Like quiet evenings with someone who speaks gently and means every word. Like knowing that real love, true love, doesn't come dressed in chaos. It walks in soft, and stays when the rest leave. It was a crisp evening, the kind where the sky turns to velvet and the air smells like something beginning. I was sitting on the balcony of my new place, smaller than the old house, but warmer in all the ways that mattered. Claire was inside, humming softly in the kitchen, barefoot and dancing to a song only she could hear. I watched her for a moment through the glass, and something settled in my chest. Peace, not the kind that comes from pretending everything is okay, but the real kind, the kind that's earned after walking barefoot through hell and coming out the other side with your soul still intact. I thought about Emily again, not often anymore, but sometimes. The way you remember a fever dream, unreal and hazy, with flashes of pain that no longer sting. She'd become a name in a closed chapter. And Blake, just a footnote. A lesson. I learned that love without respect is poison. That loyalty without honesty is a trap. And that some people only know how to take, and will keep taking until you forget who you are. But I also learned that surviving betrayal doesn't make you hard. It makes you aware, stronger, sharper, more grateful for softness when you finally find it again. Claire came outside and sat beside me, wrapping herself in a blanket and leaning her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about her." I paused, then smiled. "About how far I've come." She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Some things don't require revisiting. They just need to be understood. Then left behind. I looked out at the horizon. A new chapter had already begun. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. If I could tell the man I was back then, sitting at that restaurant table, watching his world collapse around him, I'd tell him this: "You won't break. She'll try to convince you that you're not enough, that it was your fault, that you were the problem. But you weren't. You were the anchor, the heartbeat, the soul. And when she walks away, thinking she's walking towards something better, she's just running from herself. Let her go, heal, grow, and when real love finds you again, it'll be quiet, gentle, consistent, and you'll know it's real. Because it won't have to hurt to feel alive." Claire squeezed my hand. I looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Home. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I said it out loud: "I'm happy." And this time, I meant it.